Hey Josie, how you doing? All right, Bob Dylan looks great. Good job. It's an interesting, very, very interesting idea. A couple of things I would recommend here. I think that right now, I think that this looks great. I think this is a nice, really nice contrast here with this kind of really casual um, typographic substitution here, and then with the kind of really super formal um, modern typeface set in all caps. That's interesting. I think that's really interesting. Um, One thing I would recommend here is in the guitar illustration itself. Right now, it almost seems like two separate entities, right? It almost seems like Bob and then the guitar neck. And I want those to be kind of, combined into one element. And I think the answer, that's probably obvious. And I think you're probably thinking about it right now before I even mention it. But I think the obvious solution here is to fill in that little triangle right there in black. And I think that's really going to bring it to the point where this looks like a unified illustration or even unified typography as opposed to two separate elements separated, two different elements separated by that little triangle of background color right there. So I would go ahead and fill that in with black. Other than that, I think it's a good start. It's nice and simple, and when it really comes down to it, I think Bob Dylan's music, it was folk music. It was very simple. So I think that reflects his musical style. The simplicity of the layout reflects his musical style, I think, to a very high degree. So that's an interesting choice. Um, right now, let me see something here. Okay. Right now, the only thing that's really kind of bugging me here, there's two things. This is a really super muted color palette. I want you to experiment a little bit with color and do some research. Take a look at 1960s rock, concert posters, and take a look at the color palettes and see if you can get some ideas there. But the 60s was a very vibrant, and I am using that pun purposely, very vibrant period in history, specifically when we're talking about music. So if you take a look at music posters, and really the psychedelic era was in full swing when Bob Dylan was around. So that might be an interesting option there, and borrowing some of the color palette from the 60s. Right now, I think this is a great relationship right here. This is the playfulness of the guitar illustration with the formality of the all-cap modern Didone typeface. So that's cool. But then we've got this Like a Rolling Stone, which is set in, I'm not sure if it's the same typeface here, but it's a serif, so it's very traditional and almost formal. So I'm not crazy, but let me get Bob out of the way, and we see Dylan Like a Rolling Stone, and it almost seems like it's really formal. And Dylan was a pretty serious guy, but I just think that this is just points in a kind of a different direction. What I'm getting at, Josie, is go ahead and try to use a sans serif, maybe even the exact same serif you use. This looks like bold, and that'll be fine too, as the type for Like a Rolling Stone. I would also increase that size a little bit. This is a poster, and what do we know about posters off the bat? We know that they need to be viewed at a distance. So right now I'm thinking, and once we start, if there was a PDF here, what I usually do is I open the PDF and I'll zoom out just to kind of mimic the give the illusion of looking at it at a distance. And what's going to happen if the spatial relationships aren't established accurately, things are going to start disappearing at a distance. For example, this Like a Rolling Stone, I think it's too small in relationship to the other type size. I would type scale. So what I would do is I would just increase the size of Like a Rolling Stone. That is an iconic Bob Dylan song and phrase, and it's really important. And I think we should draw a little bit of hierarchy, a little bit of attention to that. We don't want it to be first position in hierarchy by any means. Actually, if you count out hierarchy in here, I would say you're going to be going Bob Dylan and then Subhead. So you've got wonderful hierarchy set up here. I just think Like a Rolling Stone might be a little small. I think that also the typographic relationships might be a little more interesting using a sans serif for Like a Rolling Stone. The only other comment I have is watch your kerning, okay? We can see some areas where, now remember, we spent all that time kerning in weeks 1 and 2. a couple of areas in question right here. The space between the D and the Y is really wide. The space between the Y and the L is great. The space between the L and the A, again, is pretty wide. The space between the A and the N is pretty darn good. So I would close that down, and you should be in pretty good shape. Last but not least, let's go ahead and work with that color palette, like I said. I know you wanted to use musical notation for your timeline, and let's take a look at that when we get there. But it seems to me like if I remember your sketches correctly and your preliminary ideas correctly, it seems like that timeline took up a good chunk of the back of that poster, and the musical notation took a good chunk of the timeline. I would recommend this. Take a look at the front of the poster, okay? And I'm not going to give this away too much, but I do want to recommend that you take a look at the front of the poster, see what's here. Is there anything here? I'll give you a hint. Is there anything here that you can use to establish a timeline? And again, I think that's going to create some really nice continuation from the front of the poster to the back of the poster, in that you would be using like elements. So if you can find anything on the front of the poster that might be suitable for a timeline, that's good. Now, using the musical notation, it does create a nice connection that creates meaning, because the viewer's going to see the guitar, then they're going to see the musical notation for the timeline, and they're going to make that connection. That's great, right? But as I said, there was so much musical notation. I mean, I would say just use one line of musical notation and build your, one line instead of several lines of musical notation. Just use one line and then build your timeline from there. All right, great job. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. Thanks, Josie.